How inflation quietly helps governments reduce their debt. A very important question, and I look forward to addressing this right now. Inflation is often seen as the enemy. It makes groceries, gas and rent more expensive. But there's one player that quietly benefits when prices rise. Generally, governments. Because inflation doesn't just raise prices, it also reduces the real value of debt. In other words, inflation lets nations repay what they owe in money that's worth less than when they borrowed it. Sounds strange. Let's break it down simply. How governments borrow money? Let's address this question. When a government needs money, it borrows by issuing bonds. A bond is basically a promise. Lend us your money today and we'll pay you back later plus interest. That's how it sounds. These bonds are bought by investors, institutions, and even other countries. Now, when government borrows, it borrows in today's currency value, the purchasing power that exists right now. But repayment usually happens years later. And that's where inflation enters the picture. The silent trick of inflation is as follows. Let's for a moment imagine a simple example. A government borrows $1 billion and promises to repay it in 10 years. At the time of borrowing, that $1 billion could buy, let's say, 1 million cars. But over 10 years, inflation rises, prices go up. Now, $1 billion can only buy 700,000 cars. When the government repays the debt, it still returns $1 billion. The same number on paper, but that money now buys much less in the real world. So, the lender receives money that has less purchasing power than before. That's how inflation quietly erodes the real value of debt. Why governments don't really hate inflation? Now, it makes sense why moderate inflation isn't always seen as as bad as by policymakers. When prices rise, the real value of old debt shrinks. Tax revenues increase because wages and prices go up. Debt in real terms becomes easier to manage. So why inflation feels painful to households and savers? For a government carrying $1 trillion in debt, it's like a slow motion debt relief plan without ever defaulting. There happens to be a double-edged sword here, and let's talk a little more about this. The catch is, too much inflation destroys confidence in the currency itself, and lenders demand higher interest rates to protect themselves, which can make future borrowing far more expensive. So, the balance is delicate. A little inflation helps melt away old debt. Too much can burn down entire system. Inflation in this sense is like fire. Dangerous in excess, but useful when contained. So, next time you hear that prices are rising, remember somewhere in the background, governments might just be quietly breathing a brief sigh of relief. Thank you.